the amazing thing about workshops is that even though I'm supposed to be the teacher, you learn things too. You're right about number 8. I understand what you're saying now. The man, of course it could be first person. The trouble is, I knew it was third person, so I was going on that assumption. But obviously you can, yeah. So this is me not being a careful reader of this one sentence. You can't tell. Once you see more, obviously, no. But yeah, you're right. It could be a first-person narrative. That would change the story entirely. That would be really interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
You learn from your mistakes, right? So now, same thing. Look at these opening paragraphs, and now decide now that you've seen the whole paragraph. It's not really a paragraph. It's actually opening sections or paragraphs. But I kind of collapsed them all for the purposes of the reading into a sort of paragraph. Which one would you now choose to read on, now that you read more of it? don't see just one that you would pick to read on.
It's very hard to pick just.
You're only allowed to pick one. You only have enough money in your pocket to buy one book.
Just read the
It's
story.
amazing how things change though.
Things change when you see the rest of the paragraph. Because obviously, it's not just one sentence we have to write, but one sentence is the starting point. So imagine in a writing workshop where your work comes with a whole paragraph that everybody else reads anonymously. You all picked one. Anybody want a little bit more time? You all pick something? All right, here's the first question. How many of you picked the same paragraph in the first sentence that you picked? Anyone? Okay, which one was that? Want to tell me?
It was number 7.
Number 7. So that was the one that you picked originally, and you also picked that one again. Which one did you pick?
I do.
I'm sorry?
14.
14? I steal. So you still want to read I steal. Okay. Some people don't want to read it after they've read it. I don't know why, but they don't. They say, no, it's not what I expected. I wanted something else, And who else picked the same? Was it you? Which one was that?
14.
Also 14. So tell me why, those of you who picked I steal, why do you still want to read this one?
Really
Huh?
personal experience of being a kleptomaniac.
The personal experience of this person of being a kleptomaniac, right? Yeah. What about you? Why did you want to continue to read?
Yeah, stealing letter is.
Stealing letters, yeah. Was it what you expected?
Not really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a bit unexpected, isn't it? Usually people see I steal, and then they expect all kinds of things. Almost nobody guesses it's letters. Because who steals letters? Who steals letters? You'll get the key later, and we can talk about those. You picked the same one, number 7. Tell me why.
I don't know, it just has this odd sense of compelling urgency for me. It's sort of like wanting to get somewhere and just not quite being able to get there because there's always something coming up. It just resonates at a certain level, I guess. Stuck to it.
So it still resonates for you.
Yeah.
That means everybody else picked a different paragraph, right? Okay, you want to talk about that? Anybody, tell me which one you picked instead and compare it to the first one. Yep.
I picked number 9 because I was initially interested in the first sentence before, but it wasn't my choice. Number 9.
Okay, so which one did you pick originally?
I picked originally 14. Number 14.
Oh, the I
changed
steal,
to
okay.
9. This is much more interesting than number 14.
Oh, why? Because nobody picked this one the first time. I need to tell a story. Tell me why you found this one much more interesting.
I don't know, it's very concise.
Mhm.
Maybe it's personal, but I love the metaphor, the tumor metaphor.
Yes.
It's exactly, I feel the same. Also, I have a tumor in there. I understand this urge to tell a story.
Mhm.
It's, even though you want to do this urge, desire, it's not always happy. It can be very painful telling your own story. It's like a conversion. So I really want to find out what comes next.
Why did the first time round, when you just saw the sentence, I need to tell a story, why did that not compel you?
It
As
seemed
much?
compelling, but like I said, it seemed slightly less interesting than
I
the
steal.
I still,
Yep,
yeah,
okay.
the thrill that comes with it, the interest and what to still why.
Right. Okay, who else wanted to tell me?
I only just finally picked one. I read it last
because I didn't like it at all the first time around.
Which one was that?
Number 5.
Number 5. Which one did you pick originally?
I can't actually remember. Oh, it would be easy to see the beginning of things. Hard to see
Oh
that.
yeah, the beginning of things, all
Which
right.
I liked, but this one, I think the first time I didn't pick 5 because none of those things are that interesting to me. Fast food, Texas.
Yes.
Even classical music, I don't listen to a lot of
Yeah.
classical music, so I was kind of like, but somehow it changed with the rest of the paragraph because it
Right.
became about a mother and her son, and obviously there's something that she's struggling with and that she's starting to
Mhm.
cry at some point, and I was like, that became more interesting and something that's probably more close to my life because I were raising a child, so it seemed all of a sudden like something
Yeah.
to relate to more.
I mean, we are compelled to read by what we personally are interested in too, of course. And, initially, the idea of fast food, like you said, a hamburger in Texas does not sound like the most compelling thing, This actually is a very interesting aspect of the whole thing that it becomes. Something else?
I
Yeah,
first design it first. I need to tell a story first because I think the word need, there's an urgent need to tell a story. But then after reading the paragraph, I still don't know what the story is, so it's kind of a little bit disappointing. So then I chose 19.
Oh, so you did pick that, so you did pick that one,
Yes.
okay, so, but you chose 19, the one that also, actually nobody picked that one the first time, yeah. Tell me why this one suddenly became interesting.
Because I imagine the story in my head, and then I see this blind man, and then I see the jealousy of his husband on his wife, because of the connection between the blind man and his wife. And also, I was so at the end of the paragraph strikes me. So I was expecting a man not to be this lively, and I was expecting a blind man to be slow and never loud, and this stereotype. And then the man
Yes.
breaking this really moves me.
So the first time round, this one you weren't that interested in, right? Why not the first time?
Because it's I don't know, because there's out of nowhere, there's this blind man of a friend of my wife, and he's to spend the night, but then there's not so much tension here.
Right.
It's not presented in the first sentence.
Yeah. Whereas I need to tell the story seem to have more tension. But here's an interesting thing about expectation, because here we are just complete opposite, right? You wanted more of a story, and you get more of it in number 19, because there is a story there. That's clearly a story. So yeah, okay. Who else? Yeah.
It's not too much of a change in a way because I originally chose number 4,
Mm-hmm.
and now I choose number 7. But number 7 was my second choice.
Okay.
My first reading. And then it, as you mentioned, also it depends on what you're interested at that moment
Right.
as a reader. So it has to do with the life stages. I'm more interested in people who are talking about self-discovery and contribution. And so number 4 didn't turn out to be
No.
what I wanted. It was kind of, expected, cliche kind of thing.
Yeah, it's just kind of the story
But
now.
the
Yeah.
7, the suspension continues with that paragraph.
Yep.
So that's very intriguing.
So it's also what we want to read. You wanted something, because you said when you read number 4 that maybe the person, I can be with myself, I can be myself. That person could be talking about him or herself, but now clearly it's not. So then it's suddenly not as interesting. Okay, interesting. Who else? Yeah.
Originally, I picked up number 13.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, and I thought there would be insightful description or narratives, but eventually I find it tells you everything directly.
Okay. And that was not good. Yeah. So which one did you pick
And
instead?
then I changed to number 9,
Uh-huh.
and
Oh, okay.
it tells me something, but not everything.
Yes,
And
okay.
I want to know more about it
Uh-huh.
later on.
Uh-huh. So very similar to what she said also, the tension that's there. Who else? Yeah.
I picked number 8 in the first place, and I'm
Mhm.
switching to 11.
To 11. Okay. Why?
For number 8, it's too visual for me.
too visual. That's true, it's very visual, it's totally realistic, it's a scene, exactly. It's very visual, it's very realistic.
And,
Whereas number 11,
number 11 actually is merely the last two sentences at present. It's fragile, it is vulnerable, too vulnerable to bravery, to do anything.
right,
That's interesting.
yeah. So the emotions and the tension is in this character's emotions or whatever. Whereas, yes, you're right, number, what was it, 8 originally, that's much more visual. It's like, here's a story, this is what's actually happening. It's a scene, it's like in a movie or something. Yeah. Want to tell me what else you did? Would you like to know where these pieces all came from? I'm sure you would, right? Now, I did deliberately mix it between fiction and nonfiction. Okay, so because it's an odd number, there's one extra fiction than nonfiction. But I literally went fiction, nonfiction, fiction, nonfiction. That's what I did on purpose. Because, you know, I tried to pick, obviously some of them look more like fiction because it's in third person, but others do not, you know. You may be surprised who some of these are. Your person in the woods came from the Hunger Games. One of the very hot novels out there. One I confess that I never could entirely read, but you know. But I'm working with somebody who's writing science fiction, so I decided to look at it. So I'll go through them with you, but it is sort of interesting. The one on hair, that's an essay on something very basic that we all do. We all have to go get a haircut, and very much about female body image too, and the way we consider how we look and all that too. Brenda Miller is a really fine essayist, and she's also one of the people who has written craft books on writing creative nonfiction. She's a big believer on using the 5 senses. She used all of them. Now That I Am Dead is actually a very long story. All the titles that are in quotation marks are short pieces. I only picked a few that were from book-length things, you know, so the book-length ones are all italicized. So Renée Arache Melvin is a Filipino French writer. She lives in Paris, but she's Filipino. Yeah. She's quite interesting, and she writes in English. And it is a story about Filipinos in exile in France. And That First Night in My New Place Was Very Strange is actually an autobiography that is ghostwritten with somebody else, knows Jackie Chan. And it sounds exactly like Jackie Chan, that book, it really does. So this was the Hunger Games in the woods, Wade's the only person, okay. And then this fast food franchise, this is Isabel Allende, writing, no, sorry. It's Naomi Shihab writing about being Arab American after 9/11, you know, and what it's like, you know, having to deal with that in America. Nobody wanted the Korean, okay, this is Gopal Bharat, Singaporean. He's a doctor actually, but he's also a novelist and fiction writer. And he writes a lot about infidelities, I wonder why. Now this artist place, that's Pico Iyer, who is a very interesting essayist and writes about globalization quite often, you know. The Global Soul was a book of his that was quite big. This was in, I think it was in the New York Times or the New Yorker, I can't remember, it was sort of an essay, but you can find it if you just Google this. Now, this man that got out of the bed first, it's from a novel.
This makes perfect sense now.
Yes, doesn't it, now that you know who it is? The Chinese Box, yeah. And that's not the Chinese Box that was the movie. This is a novel by Christopher New, who was a professor here at Hong Kong U. He was a philosophy professor. He lived in Hong Kong for a long time, and he wrote this novel called The Chinese Box, among other novels. He's written a lot of novels set in Asia, like in Shanghai, and there's one in India as well. And he's still writing novels. Last I knew, his latest book, as far as I remember, is about Lyndhurst Terrace, I believe. It's about a prostitute, a European prostitute living there. And it's based on a murder case that was a real one, and he kind of writes a story about it. The need to tell a story is, where am I going? Victoria Times School. Leaves the safety of her home, right? That's Isabel Allende, yeah. And it's about why I write. And it was kind of a series of essays by different very well-known writers who were talking about why they write. So nobody in our neighborhood expected Chen Zhenyi would come back. This is one of Han Zhen's short stories. It's a good one. He's interesting in that he's one of the earlier writers of contemporary times who started to use the first person plural. Because he often writes about the collective, how all the people in the village or in the office see these other people. He talks about the gossip that goes on and all that. And I really quite like this particular story of his. The first time I cheated on my husband, Cheryl Strayed, wonderful memoirist. She's had a very eventful life, I have to say, and so she has a lot to tell. She did this long journey across the, is it Pacific Trail? Yeah, on her own, yeah, yeah. But you know, she's a really clear writer. She's an interesting writer. She writes well. I have met her, and she is a fascinating woman. She really is. Now this one, nobody wanted to read Flannery O'Connor, poor thing. Very famous story. Everything that rises.
That makes sense too. I mean, really, all of their voices you hear.
Yes. Once you know who it is. And this too happens during illness is Lu Zhen. Probably one of China's most famous writers. Yeah. When he was ill, he wrote a series of essays. This is towards the end of his life about illness. Yeah. And they are quite interesting. Now I steal Mona Simpson. This was, I have never forgotten this story. I read it when it first appeared, and I believe it was the New Yorker or I can't remember which magazine it first appeared in. And I was like, oh my God, what is this story? And it has remained one of those classic short stories in American short fiction because it is just so unusual. You should go, it's easy to find. If you Google it, you find it. It's not what you expect. Just look at the title of it, Lawns. It's not at all what you would expect. And as you read on, it's the last thing you expect. But it's a wonderful one, and it's very much a woman's story, I can tell you that. Mona Simpson is Steve Jobs' half-sister. So the Two Men and Two Girls on the Boat, this is Eileen Cheng, Zhang Eileen. She wrote a few works in English. This was one of them. I found it in one of the anthologies that Renditions puts out here. There are not many. You know the famous movie Lust, Caution, you know? She wrote that originally in English as a short story. It's terrible, the English version. The Chinese version is way better. I had to read the Chinese version in translation, but you read even in translation, you look at it and it's like, it's so much better. But the English one is really interesting because, you know, she was writing at a time when there was hardly any Chinese people writing in English. She had to compromise so much, she had to explain so many things. She kept trying to give context and explain the clothing and the history. Whereas in the Chinese one, she just tells you the story. She doesn't pretend. And I think that if you get a chance and you want to look at Chinese writing in English and what. Look at her version of the English story that originated before the Chinese story, because it was much later that she wrote it. The Chinese story is so much better, but she stopped trying to explain herself. The only way you can write in the second language, even though it's not your first language, is not to try to explain too much. Remember what was said earlier about explaining an idea? You cannot explain in story that. You must just tell it, show what was going on, you know? It's easy to see the beginning of things. Goodbye to all that. Joan Didion, a wonderful collection of essays, Slouching Towards Bethlehem, a classic book of essays by this American writer. Her son wanted to talk again suddenly. Alice Elliott Dock is a very interesting short story writer. She didn't publish a lot of work, but what she's written is very powerful, very emotional, and you know, the delicate balance, and this mother-son. I've always been fascinated by this because I have no children. You know, I want to know what it's like to be a mom, but I don't want to have the children to find out, you know. So this is how I find out. You know? When the weather is good, it's funny, Peter Hessler is a very well-known writer, but nobody ever picks this sentence. You know? I think it's too journalistic, possibly, and everybody feels like, oh, I know that story. But in fact, it's quite a good travel essay about walking the Great Wall. And this blind man, okay, this is a famous short story, Raymond Carver's Cathedral. We use it for teaching. Raymond Carver, I have to admit, is not my favorite short story writer, but I think he's brilliant, so I teach his work. I teach a lot of stuff that I don't think it's not my favorite stuff. Because you know what's good is good. Good writing is good writing, whether I like it or not, you know? So I just want to show you one other slide. That, this is Gardner, again, talking about the unconscious. You know, we heard earlier, creative writing is both a science and an art. It's not always, you know, and trusting your unconscious, I think, can help in more academic or the kind of writing that we're sometimes forced to do that is too dry. Because when you have a genre like academic or news writing, which is very clear-cut, you get bogged down in the logical or the formulaic. But how do you rise above the structure that is there? You can't evade it. You've got to do it because that's the way to do it correctly. But to get beyond that, you must get to the unconscious. You must get to the inner thing that you are trying to write about. You know, I stole that idea of the I. You know, writers plagiarize all the time, but at least I acknowledge it, you know? So I like the idea of the originality of the writer's I that Gardner wishes us to do. Because that I that is at the root of all our writing, that's who we are. So I'm going to give you just take-home homework. Write your opening paragraph. Take about 10 minutes. Make yourself sit down and try to do it. But only pick one of your two opening sentences. Pick the one that is more urgent to write and write it. Okay? So here's a handout with all the, you know, all those quotes and things I have there so you can have the references. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I know it's lunchtime. I do run something called Authors at Large. You can come for a week or so to these locations that I do it with my partner, my business partner, where we have the mornings for writing, the afternoon we do an actual workshop. For that you have to turn in a complete piece of writing, about 5,000 words or so, in advance, and you read everybody else's work also and then discuss it. But I'm also doing a workshop. So one of the workshops I'm doing this summer in Thailand, and this is the most, actually, the best deal because it's the most affordable one, in Hua Hin. I'm running a generative writing workshop, so something like this, but a whole week of it. So we actually get to read each other's work. So if you're interested, here are some cards, and come and take one. Authors at Large, would love to have you come and join me. The other two workshops, one is a fiction one is a nonfiction one, where you have to have a complete piece of about 5,000 words to share. But if you want something that is more like generative but still have a chance, I'm running a more structured one for that in Thailand. Okay, that's in July. So questions? Anything you want to ask me?
I have a very practical issue.
Okay.
Because you're a published writer, and I don't know what's the basic steps to get your work
Will published?
Or if it's a story, novel, or
Uh-huh.
something.
It's much harder to publish a novel, a book, but it is possible to get started by publishing short stories. I was much more of a novelist than a short story writer, and so it took me a much longer time to get going. But I also wrote short stories, and I did manage to publish short stories first, because there's more opportunities for that, there are lots of journals and things. But if you really want to write a novel, just write it, and take your chances. It's hard. Novels, if you have an agent, that helps. If you want to try to get a big publisher that will pay you some money, you definitely need an agent. But even with a small, because I've published mostly with independent and smaller literary presses, even for those, I think it's helpful to have an agent, as my agent makes sure that because the laws change and the current practice changes, and I don't want to pay attention to the legalese. He looks after it for me, and he has for years. It's competitive. That's all I can say. You just have to take a lot of rejection. As long as you're willing to do that, it's not a bad idea to just get it out there, But with a novel, if you try to publish a novel or fiction, you probably need to have the whole book written first. It's really hard if you're a new writer to sell it on a book proposal. Some have done it, but they tend to know somebody, or they tend to be connected. If you're Stephen King's daughter, maybe. Seriously, just go and look at the pedigree of the people who get those deals. Many of them come from literary backgrounds. It is much easier if you're, somebody's child and come out of that world, obviously, because you know everyone. But if you're a first-time writer, a novel, you probably need the whole book. And then you can send out like a synopsis and a few chapters. Non-fiction's a little different. You can give them a book proposal. It's a good idea to have written a little bit of it so that you have something to show, but if you have a really hot topic, you're researching something that is hot, it's much easier to sell non-fiction. Way easier. Because the turnover is a little faster, actually, than non-fiction. Yeah.
A practical question, as an academic who's, doing mostly academic work, do you have any tips for people writing ethnography? So we're doing ethnographic research, and that, it can be a really, really dry piece of work, but it can also, have good creative writing sense, and it can be much more interesting. So, for those contexts, what are your tips for us?
Do you know the philosopher Kwame Anthony Appiah? He's well known for a book called Cosmopolitanism. Read his first book and read his second book. Just compare the two. I got interested in his work from his first book. The first book, I'm not a philosopher, right? It was so academic. And I could not follow all his arguments, but I could get the gist of it. And then he wrote the second book, which is so much more accessible. That's a perfect case study example of how to turn your academic writing into something that the ordinary layperson can read. You've got to be careful how you use your footnotes. that would be my first thought. And I think you need to find language that, and he made the second book, he talked much more about his own experience. And he made it sort of relatable to people. And so it was much easier to understand where he was coming from. And I immediately got it, Now, I struggled through the first one. I just have to, because I just think he's fascinating. I understood in principle the thesis he was trying to put there, but it was so academic. And unless you have the background, which I did, you just can't possibly follow. So look at academics who have made that crossover and see what they've done.
Anthony,
Yeah, APPIAH, yeah. He's an interesting one. The other one is that Milton scholar, what's his face? The name's escaped me just now, but he's become a kind of more popular writer now, you know. But you can look at, there was a writer who won the Pulitzer in nonfiction. He wrote a memoir, he's an oncologist. He wrote a memoir about becoming an oncologist. And so on the one hand, you know, he's a doctor, he's a medical man, and he made it much more relatable though. So that's an interesting one to look at also. Yeah. I think some of the science writing might be an interesting place to look, because people who research rather difficult subjects but manage to make it a story that you can understand, I think that that's always good. Yeah.
Maybe it's just related to that question. You just talked about that I shouldn't explain too much in our creative work. So, but when I'm thinking when we're doing creative nonfiction, like if I do an ethnographic fiction, my objective is to explain something to people, but through like a fictional way. But so, how do I balance these two things? Like, do you have any tips?
It's interesting because, you know, one of the things we always teach in writing creatively is like show, don't tell. So give an example, write a scene, or, you know, show something that happens, use an incident, or things like that. On the other hand, a very well-known writer, Cynthia Ozick, said, hey, sometimes you just have to tell. They're both right. You know, showing instead of telling is definitely a good way to get the story across. But sometimes you just have to tell, so what do you do there? That's where language becomes important. If your language is compelling enough, original enough, doesn't sound like cliches, you can tell till the cows are coming home and people will still read it. You know? There is a way of telling, and there are some interesting sort of fictional examples of those that you can look at. But I mean, it's because a lot of narrative can actually be a great deal of telling. If you look at the opening of Lolita, for example, do you remember what it's like? It's not the story of the pedophile. It's the story of this manuscript that was given to this man, and he's telling you now that he needs to get it published. That's like a frame that's there. So that's kind of telling that you say, well, why the hell do we need this? Because if you don't, because the book is told in first person, there are people who won't read the book because it's about pedophilia, all right? But the book is told in first person. How do you sympathize or empathize with a character like this, who seems so horrible, you know? So that's another sort of example of it. I come back to Nabokov a lot because he is a good example of a lot of things. It's hard, I mean, but I say language. If you're going to tell a lot, you're going to do a lot of telling, you've got to find a way to make the language maybe poetic or lyrical or somehow really sharp and crisp and precise so that it's readable, so that, you know, it doesn't sound like anybody else. It's tough. That's all I can say. You just have to keep trying, you know, and take a look at it.
I got another question before.
Actually,
We have to wrap it up.
I'm sorry. Sorry, maybe there might be time after if Shushu's willing. So I just wanted to take the opportunity really to say that, at least for me, I think this morning's really represented a homecoming of many sorts. I don't think I've managed to get my head in the writing space for a long time, and I've been pining for a writing workshop of sorts. So it's been an incredibly productive session, at least on a personal level. But I think also a lot of the feedback that we're able to generate in the room itself, it was really interesting to see the kind of sentences and paragraphs that spoke to each of us. And I'm sure that all of us here feel inspired and really invigorated in some way or the other to go back to our desks and, you know, put this stuff out there. And I think to that point, the sentence that was most compelling to you later, sort of, I have a story and I have to tell it. I think we're all sort of sitting here feeling that rush. Thanks in many respects, I think, to the way in which you worked with us through this entire process. It's been a very creative, cathartic, and compelling process. So thank you so much for that. Also, I think one of the things that we'd love to sort of highlight and share with you, which we didn't get to do at the beginning, is that Xu Xi's memoir called Dear Hong Kong, an Elegy for a City is going to be released on the 1st of July, 2017. That's our 20th anniversary of the handover of Hong Kong, and so we're eagerly looking forward to that, and we wish you a lot of readership and
Thank you.
success.
And I might add that Anthony Daptaran here is also one of the authors in that series. What is the title of yours, Anthony?
City of Protest.
City of Protest, but he wrote about Occupy.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
So that at least the two of us will have books out. But there's like, it was 7 in total?
I think so, 7.
Yeah. And one of the other ones is by Dong Haizhong, which maybe you know his work. It's a collection of stories. They sound interesting, but I'm looking forward to reading it because I really like his work.
So thank you very much, Xu Xi. I'd also like to invite you all to please thank Stacy Ford and Sally, both of whom have worked incredibly hard.
All right, if there's anybody that doesn't know where to get food, let us know. We are going to whisk Xu Xi upstairs to have a quick bite, but we convene again at 2 o'clock. So please, if you're interested in continuing the conversation about narrative research and hearing from others and reading the program information, that is there.
So are you joining us? Yeah. In the afternoon. I know that.